Hello, everyone. I'm Zainab, and I'm joined here by my team member, Brian. And today we're going to talk about data privacy.
Some current developments in dealing with data security for healthcare informatics include things like cloud-based frameworks for healthcare, which deal with electronic medical records and security of how those are stored in cloud architecture, and how they are provisioned over the private cloud or the hospital cloud, and then how they are accessed over uh, public clouds when records are shared between providers or between organizations. There's some very interesting work being done in electronic medical records to be able to provide one-time or instant access to medical records between non-concurrent providers. The sensor cloud data input security is another interesting area that's being developed right now inside of this framework in this area, and it has to do with W bands or wireless body area networks. These are very similar to PANs or personal area networks that deal with all of the data collected by our third-party interfaces that we carry with us on a daily basis. The major difference between the PAN and the W-band here is that the W-band is typically talking about collecting bioinformatics and dealing with wireless IoT devices or devices that are connected directly to the patient's body in some way. And the research areas on improving how that data is collected, encrypted, stored, and transmitted, both at rest and in transit, are currently evolving. And then data mining, which has been a huge thing that's been going on for years. And there's been many government regulations put around data privacy for healthcare's, such as the GDPR and HIPAA and something like the Australian Acts for the Right to be Forgotten and those kinds of things. But there's some very interesting research that's currently happening right now about how to anonymize that data and use frameworks to use different styles of metadata in log formats to be able to aggregate relevant information out of these data sets to provide a holistic approach to not only disease progression, but for things like risk factors, carrier factors, and other things along those natures. So some of this may sound a little familiar from the cybersecurity and healthcare that we've done previously this term, but this is more specifically focused on data security in healthcare, specifically patient data and medical data outside of just the general information security frameworks, right? So some of the pros to having data security in place and being able to quickly and accurately ascertain that information and develop those security standards and collate that data includes the scalability of health systems, right? By spending time on research for protecting that data, especially in cloud environments, it allows for new avenues of scalability previously unheard of in the healthcare industry for industries and organizations to expand into cloud infrastructure and allow for the segregation and encryption of that data to continue. This is specifically important in developing countries and developing organizations, right? Rural areas also have a big impact in this area. Data analytics for a more complete understanding of the pathological development and clinical risk factors. I kind of talked about this a little bit in the last slide, but by using these data points that are collected and anonymized in the data security and data privacy section of healthcare, we're able to develop a more rounded kind of 360 view on diagnostics and tools and preventative care, in addition to understanding the pathological development of diseases and other healthcare concerns. Obviously, some of the cons here, and again, this is going to sound a little bit familiar from previously, but the high risk of continuous care when the patient system fails. By having data security in the cloud and that scalability, we're actually kind of helping to mitigate some of this, but there is still a con or a risk here when the connections fail for that. How does the data that's in transit stay secure? How does the data that gets retransmitted stay secure and accurate? And then data at rest in the cloud and in interaction with the mobile devices or the client-side devices, right? So there's some cons to consider there. Data dependencies can cause delays in critical care. If I'm using too much of one resource in one area, then I may not have that resource to deliver critical information for critical care cases, or I may be missing major pieces of the data because of data privacy acts and data encryption. The algorithm may not have correctly identified something and may cause some kind of a delay in a critical care situation. And not all anonymization algorithms provide adequate protection. There's lots of research out here on different data mining tools and data mining algorithms that deal with anonymization of data. And we find in the research that there is quite a substantial difference between the anonymization algorithms and also the data mining algorithms on whether or not they provide accurate and clear pictures into what we're looking for healthcare informatics. As you may have already determined by the previous couple of slides, there's lots of areas for future research here. Internet of Things in healthcare, not only just Internet of Things inside of hospital and clinical settings, but also the WBAN and PAN data correlations and those Internet of Things devices that extend past the clinical setting in healthcare, and being able to understand the appropriate mechanisms for data security in those for healthcare. Take the Apple Watch, for example, or the Google fitness trackers, those kinds of things. How does that data get anonymized and stored? Can it be used in larger data sets? Those kinds of things. How's it shared between providers? How do we ensure that protection and guidelines with all the legal and ethical responsibilities? Speaking of ethical, there's also some future research here in ethical guidelines for healthcare patient data, specifically around how we handle that patient data in terms of dealing with non-accredited sources or non-traditional sources, and how that data is shared with them, or if it could be shared with them at the patient's discretion, right? Network topology for medical devices. Again, this goes back to the cloud computing and healthcare and how we interface with the myriad of devices that are in a clinical setting and be able to provide that information back. It's actually kind of an interesting thing that's going on right now with stethoscopes. They're adding digital forensics into stethoscopes to help identify different breathing and heart murmur patterns. and provide amplification of that information directly back to the physician through the stethoscope. So that's kind of an interesting thing that's happening right now. Also, the World Health Organization's impacts on data security standards, outside of just the legal and ethical impacts that we see the nation states applying and enforcing. What are some of the World Health Organization's responsibilities to securing digital patient records and health records, and ensuring that those who have access need the access, and those kinds of things. There's a lot of areas here that are open for future research.